Hello, welcome back to another video. I'm Mr. Hager. Today we're going to be talking about United States during the era of imperialism. All right, so when we talk about imperialism, right, there's a few different motivations for it. But in general, when we talk about imperialism, it's the economic, political, cultural, or military domination of a less technologically developed group by more advanced nations. So when a nation takes over another nation, and they have like some sort of technological superiority. All right, so let's talk about American imperialism. Okay, so America was really founded by risk takers and explorers. So for the first 150 years of our history it was this time of expansion. For most of the United States history, they are expanding from coast to coast, right? From one side of the United States to the other coast, so the Atlantic to the Pacific. This really was going on for a good half of our history. We're expanding out west, which we've mentioned in our previous classes and stuff. So, you could see on the map that it's in chunks, right? We have the United States after the American Revolution, the Louisiana Purchase, the Mexican Cession, Oregon Territory. Eventually, we're going to expand from coast to coast. However, we do not count this as imperialism. So why not? Because it is a more advanced country, nation taking over the Native Americans, which had less technological superiority. Well, it's because America, we viewed this land from coast to coast in the continental United States already ours. So since we viewed it as already ours as part of our manifest destiny and stuff, we technically do not count it as imperialism. We viewed it as our natural property. All right, so before we get into American imperialism, we got to talk about Europe, okay? Because Europe is really one of the first places that actually imperialize. So European imperialism begins with Christopher Columbus, when Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America. America was there to begin with, but it was sort of new to the Europeans. It reached its climax during the French and Indian War, where England versus France, they were both competing over this Oregon territory, the territory in Canada and stuff. So once that war was over, that sort of ended this older form of imperialism. The countries that really did have empires were Great Britain, France, Germany, and Holland. However, they were seeking to conquer and occupy the territory. The primary goal of this was to receive raw materials. So the 13 colonies in before the United States and stuff, their main goal was to give raw materials back to England so England can make those raw materials into finished goods to send back to their colonies. So it's just like a big business scheme and stuff. This is what we call old imperialism. What we're going to get into today is the new imperialism. So instead of actually, occupying, sending tons of settlers to settle the land like the 13 colonies, they're going to have just political dominance over different regions around the world. All right. Eventually, by the 19th century, there's America. Once we conquered, coast to coast, we're starting to think outward. Okay, what is America's going to look like, after we've conquered coast to coast? But the Europeans and the Americans, we didn't want to just admit that we were simply taking all these places around the world. They needed justifications for this. All right, so they wanted to seem like they are the good guys in the story, that they are doing a good thing by taking over most of the world. So most European imperialists and Americans, they thought that they were bringing light to the darkness, that they were going to, that the rest of the world was, behind, uncivilized, and they are going to, bring civilization. There's this whole civilization mission where they're like, oh, we're going to bring ideas about democracy and education and science and medicine over to these places. Also, they believed in spreading religion too. So we see a lot of evangelicalism, converting people over to Protestant Christianity during this time. They also argued that they were superior, right? There was this racist motivation called the white man's burden, which we will get into momentarily. So that leads us to that they want to say they're doing all these good things like Christianizing the other peoples around the world, bringing them civilization and medicine. But in reality, a lot of these countries, what their main reason is for having these empires around the world was for competition with each other, right? All these European countries, England, France, Germany, and then later the United States, once it emerges as a global economic superpower, they all want to compete with each other to prove that they are the best country around. So how do you prove that you're the best country around? You have the largest empire. Also, trade routes. A lot of these ships back at this time, right, they're steam power, they're coal power during this time of new imperialism. But they can't make the whole trip, around the world. Instead, they need to have ports. They need trade routes. They need safe ports where the ships could stop, restock, and then make it to their next destination. Just like truckers today, they need to stop by gas stations, every once in a while, refuel. That's what they needed. They needed ports, safe freshwater ports around the world. Also, raw materials, right? This is during the era of the Industrial Revolution. So, think about the railroads that we talked about. Where are they going to get the iron from? Well, a lot of these colonies provided that iron. Rubber, right? Rubber is going to be used for the rubber belts to power the machines to make sure the gears turn. Oil, those kind of things, those natural resources. The European powers in America, we wanted those resources from the colonies in order to fuel our industrial revolution. And then we talked about evangelicalism, converting people to Christianity, and making them essentially act like white people. And then also nationalism, right? Nationalism sort of goes along with this competition with other nations. Nationalism is a love for your country. You think that your country is the best country on earth, and the best way to prove that is by having the most territory. Also, we start seeing this other, belief that sort of pops up. It goes along with this white man's burden belief, and it's called jingoism. Okay, so jingoism is sort of aggressive nationalism. It's not only that you think that your country is the best, but you're willing to fight other countries to prove it right. So jingos, there are aggressive nationalists that they are really the ones that believe that in order to prove their country is the best, they need to conquer other territories to prove it to be true. So this jingoism and stuff is later going to be one of the main causes for World War I. This aggressive nationalism, because the downside of thinking that your country is the best and wanting to fight other people for it is it tends to lead to war. Also, we start seeing a lot of racial theories, racial motivations for imperialism during this time. Racism as we know it, right, really starts developing during this time. So we have this scientific racism that develops in the late 19th century, the mid 19th century. So if you remember back to like your biology classes and stuff, there's a guy called Charles Darwin, right? Charles Darwin, he is a scientist in England. He goes on a expedition to the Galapagos Islands, and then starts observing animals. And then while he's on this trip, he writes a book called On the Origin of Species, where he comes up with the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest, that over time beings evolve, right? And only the strongest end up evolving, right? The most dominant traits. Now, Charles Darwin, when he's talking about this survival of the fittest, he's really only talking about like animals and plants and stuff. Those are things that evolve over time, because this is by the 1850s, it's still very, Christianized culture in Europe and the Americas and stuff. So he didn't even apply this to humanity until, pretty much on his deathbed. Then he's like, oh no, I also include humans in on this evolution thing. But then later on, there's going to be a British politician named Herbert Spencer, and he is going to use Charles Darwin's ideas. Charles Darwin only talking about science, right? He's not talking about human societies, but Herbert Spencer is reading this thing about survival of the fittest and evolution, and he is looking to human society. And he is going to create this thing called social Darwinism, which said that there are certain societies and races and people that are simply stronger and better than other people. So when we talked about the robber barons, right, the super wealthy business owners, the bourgeoisie, rich people and stuff during the industrial era, they argued that they were simply better than their workers. They were richer, and the reason why they're richer isn't because of privileges that they had, right, being born into wealth. No, what is giving them this superiority is because they believe that they are simply better, that their workers are like another race of people that completely are separate from them. They don't even view them as the same kind of humans, that they're just built better. This same understanding is going to be applied to imperialism as well. Europe and the United States, they're going to think that since they are white, since they have the strongest economies in the world, that gives them the justification for colonizing these other places around the world. So there's this guy named Rudyard Kipling. Okay, so Rudyard Kipling, he writes a poem about something that we'll talk about in just a second, the Filipino-American War. This poem is titled "The White Man's Burden." Rudyard Kipling, he also wrote The Jungle Book, right? And he wrote several other poems and stuff. But one of his main theories is this white man's burden. So when you think of a burden, right, it's not something easy. It's not something that you want to do. So this argument that of the white man's burden is that it's Europe and Americans' job, since that they are stronger and stuff, that they have a moral obligation to take control of other countries in order to civilize them. That is the white man's burden to civilize the other places around the world, the inferior races, as they put it. So in this picture, right, we see it's a political cartoon from the Detroit Journal, and it's titled "The White Man's Burden," right, referencing this poem that Kipling produced. So in this, we see, American soldier, probably like Teddy Roosevelt, and he is carrying, it sort of looks like, ape-like, right? But really, this is supposed to be a indigenous person and stuff. What we see in these political cartoons is a theory called a practice called simianization. Simian, means like ape-like, right? So a lot of like inferior people that they claimed, right, from around the world, they would make them look more like monkeys in order to prove this racist theory of scientific racism true, that they are less evolved than the white man. So the white man is carrying the indigenous person up a hill, right? That's showing the burden, right? It's heavy. You're carrying someone up a hill, and you're carrying them to a schoolhouse. So the schoolhouse is supposed to be the civilization, that this man, he is doing a good thing by carrying this indigenous person up to school, teaching them about civilization so they could better themselves. So it's really a racist motivation for imperialism. Also, we start seeing this in advertisements too, this idea of the white man's burden. Especially, for some reason, this company, Pear Soap, really bought in to this white man's burden belief and stuff. So this is a soap advertisement that would be in a magazine during the late 19th century, early 20th century. So it's titled "The White Man's Burden." The step towards lightening is through teaching the values of cleanliness. So, lightening, right? The implication is that these people around the world, they are dirty. They're less civilized. So how do you clean them? How do you clean something that's dirty? You give them a bar of soap. So in the little corner, the right corner of this picture, you could see a missionary. That's sort of like the Christianization of these people around the world, and they are handing an indigenous islander a bar of soap. So it's sort of like this big scene of like giving civilization, right? And then underneath the pear soap, it says a potent factor in lightening the dark corners of the earth as civilization advances, while amongst the cultured of all nations, it holds to the highest places that this is the ideal toilet soap. So how do you prove the white man's burden is right? You buy this pair of soap. The next cartoon, political cartoon advertisement that I'll show you is also very problematic, right? So this is another Pear Soap. Pear Soap really buys into this scientific racism. So this is a white child giving a black child a bath, right, using the Pear Soap. And in the second picture, it shows that the black baby, his skin has been made white, right? He has been civilized due to this Pear Soap. But his head is still black, which shows that this other belief that even if you try to civilize these other people around the world, they will never be as civilized as a white person. So pretty crazy that this is everywhere you would go, you would see things like this racist motivation for imperialism. A lot of people bought into these beliefs. All right, so for a century, Russia. So let's talk about Alaska for a second, okay? So Russia and Britain both claim that Alaska was won in this 1784 war and stuff, and they start establishing these ports, right? So Russia and Britain, they both had claims to Alaska, but Russia, had essentially a higher claim on it, right? So Russia owned Alaska, and America, in the spirit of expanding itself, right, decides to purchase Alaska from the Russians. So there's this guy, William Stewart, right? And he's going to buy Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. This is about a penny an acre, right? Which is a great deal. So they purchase Alaska, which is the United States' largest state. And the thing is, this is a great steal, right? And in the long term, it's been very profitable to have Alaska. Alaska is very, resource rich. However, at the time, Stewart, right? They called this Stewart's folly. Everyone made fun of Stewart, roasted him mercilessly about purchasing Alaska. Even though this essentially doubles the size of the United States, most people are like, Stewart, what are you doing? Why should we even own Alaska? The Russians were just using Alaska for like seal fur and stuff, the fur trade. We don't care that much about fur. But later on, there's going to be gold rushes that happen in Alaska. There's going to be, they're going to find large amounts of silver and coal and oil. And today, Alaska is a very important state in the United States. So now we see this as a stroke of genius, right? Stewart is able to see, how valuable Alaska was. However, in the meantime, he's very sad about it because everyone's making fun of him for this purchase. All right, so by the end of the 19th century, there's the belief of manifest destiny, that it's America's duty to expand from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. But by the end of the 19th century, manifest destiny had been achieved. There's nowhere else to go, right? We purchased Alaska, but, unless we're going to declare war on Canada or Mexico and stuff again, there's nothing more we could do in the continental United States. And, a lot of politicians and philosophers begin to argue, sort of think about, like, what does it mean to be American if you are not expanding? That it's our unique culture that we're constantly expanding. And if we stop that, right, if we stop conquering more places, that means our culture will die. It's a little dramatic. So a lot of politicians argue that in order to keep this spirit alive, in order to continue to expand, us as a country, we're going to need to take over other areas around the world, have an empire on its own. So, yep, their solution is to conquer territory abroad and take it by force. So, 1867, right? We have Alaska that is purchased, right? In 1878, we get American Samoa, and then America is going to turn its attention to Hawaii. So, in order to do this, right, the U.S. Argued that it's going to need sites around the world, right? In order to prove that our country is the strongest, we need these naval ports around the world, right? So we're going to start establishing naval bases, a naval presence in the Pacific Ocean, right? And America is going to, develop its own very powerful navy. They're going to call this America's Great White Fleet. All right. So by 1896, right, America is going to create 11 powerful steel battleships, right? These are going to be steam-powered ships, right? They're going to have, tons of a naval presence and firepower, and they're going to be a force that, is pretty much as powerful as many of the other European countries at the time. So in 1907, President Roosevelt creates this Great White Fleet of all white battleships, and this is going to display America as one of the top naval powers around the world. So one of the first territories that the United States acquired outside of its borders was Hawaii. Now, Hawaii was its own independent kingdom by the late 1800s. It had a monarchy. They ruled themselves independently. But over time, more and more white missionaries from the United States and other European countries ended up landing in Hawaii. There was a large sugar plantation corporation in Hawaii. If you've ever had the fruit cups before that say Dole on it, there's a businessman, Stanford Dole, who owns the Dole Corporation and stuff. He's going to settle in Hawaii, and eventually they're going to lead to Hawaii's overthrow. So the white Hawaiians, who are originally from the United States, but they lived in Hawaii over a couple generations, they decide to overthrow Queen Lakaluni, who's the queen of Hawaii, and overthrow their monarchy and name themselves as their own independent country. So Hawaii eventually is going to be acquired by the United States in 1893. So they ruled themselves independently for almost 10 years, right, under this guy Stanford Dole, the Dole Fruit Cups. But by 1893, Hawaii is going to be fully annexed by the United States. Remember that the United States, they have this growing naval presence in the Pacific Ocean. Hawaii checks all the boxes. It's right there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The U.S. could create a Navy base there and have a strong foothold in the Pacific, right? So, in Asia's back door. So eventually, Hawaii is going to get its statehood not until after World War II. When Pearl Harbor happens, starting World War II and everything, Hawaii is just a territory, just like Puerto Rico is a territory today for the United States, but it's not its own state quite yet. If you've ever watched Lilo and Stitch before, that song, like the Loa Oi song, that is actually from Hawaii's last queen. It's sort of like a love letter to Hawaii, like, oh, Hawaii, I love you, but, the United States has taken us over. Very interesting story, another example of how America, right, we're fighting for freedom and independence. That's at least what we say America's core values are. but here we are overthrowing, a sovereign nation. So it's all about trade with Asia. Asia has all these resources. If we go back all the way to the reason why Christopher Columbus is, sailing and then he ends up in the Americas, is he is looking for a sea route to Asia. Asia has all these resources that the Western countries want. So one of the Asian countries, in particular, though, Japan, had been isolated for about 200 years. Japan, that once Europeans start interacting with Japan, they try converting a lot of the Japanese to Christianity. Japan says they don't want any of that, so they're going to close themselves off under the Tokugawa shogunate for the next 200 years. So Japan has been isolated. The only people they really trade with are the Chinese and the Dutch. But eventually, the United States shows up as soon, around the time that they capture Hawaii and start contacting Hawaii and stuff. So there's going to be this admiral in the U.S. Navy named Matthew Perry. Millard Fillmore, who's the president at the time, tells Matthew Perry to sail over to Japan and force Japan to end their 200 years of isolation under any means necessary. So Perry is going to sail to Japan with a war fleet. And they're going to show up on the shores of Japan, knock on their door and say, hey, Japan, open up. Japan is like, no, we've been closed for 200 years. We're not going to start trading with these Americans now. Matthew Perry starts opening fire, shooting the cannons from his steamships onto the Japanese coast, burning down cities, and eventually it forces the Japanese to concede. The Japanese, they had gunpowder weapons, but they had gunpowder weapons from like the 1600s, right? They had like muskets and everything. They weren't prepared to deal with repeating rifles and steamships and things of that nature. So Japan is forced to open up its doors and trade with the West due to America. Eventually, this is going to bite America in the butt because a byproduct of Japan industrializing is, Japan is eventually going to, pick a fight with America, causing World War II to happen, the U.S. to get involved in World War II. All right, so we are now going to turn our attention to the Spanish-American War. Okay, so in 1895, the Cubans are still under Spanish authority. Spain still owns a lot of Cuba and stuff. So the Cubans, they want to fight for their independence. And this is riling a lot of Americans up. But why? Why should America worry about what's happening with Cuba? So there's this group of news journalists and stuff called the Yellow Journalist. So yellow journalism is a style of newspaper reporting that emphasizes sensationalism over facts. It's sensationalized, like, oh, things are so bad in Cuba, America needs to intervene and help in this war and stuff. If you've ever seen, like, the grocery store, those magazines saying, like, oh, Queen Elizabeth didn't die, she was abducted by aliens. That's pretty much what yellow journalism is, right? Just, catching title to get readers' attentions, and it worked. If you've ever heard, like, don't believe everything you read, back then, in the 1800s, then early 1900s, you only have the newspaper. So a lot of people did believe what was in the newspaper, right? The newspaper wouldn't lie about this. It was on the news. News is credible. So this yellow journalism is uncredible news, but people are taking it as fact. So the situation's this. There is a U.S. ship, the USS Maine, off the coast of Cuba. And the USS Maine is going to spontaneously blow up, and it's going to kill 258 American sailors. The yellow journalist is going to take this newspaper and start printing, right, saying that, oh, the Spanish, they blew up the USS Maine, leading to 200 plus deaths, and it's all Spain's fault. So as Americans, they're reading this, and they're like, why would Spain blow up our ship? We need to now get involved in Cuba. So this is the start of the Spanish-American War. The USS Maine blows up, the yellow journalists write about it, and it riles up Americans to fight in this war. So, so in April 1898, the United States declares war on Spain. Eventually, they're going to find out that that ship, the USS Maine, it just blew up because those steamships in the late 1800s, they tend to have a lot of system failure and blow up. So so Spain technically did not shoot down this ship. But because of the power of journalism, Spain was blamed, causing this this domino effect of causing war and imperialism in the Pacific. All right, so during the Spanish-American War, Americans are going to start signing up in large numbers to go fight in this war. This is one of the first times in about almost 100 years where America has fought a war against another European power. The last one was the War of 1812, where America was fighting the British. So this was a big deal. And a lot of people signed up for it. One group in particular was the Rough Riders. The Rough Riders wasn't a standard military unit. They were just a bunch of guys that wanted to dress up like a cowboy and go fight for America in Cuba. The leader of the Rough Riders is going to be this guy, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt is going to become very important later on. This is where he's going to make a name for himself. So without his participation in this war, Theodore Roosevelt probably wouldn't have become the next president. Also, we have this group called the Buffalo Soldiers. So remember, this is the time during Jim Crow South, the Black Codes. We have the Reconstruction just ended 20 years after this point. So the U.S. military was still segregated at this time. So the Buffalo Soldiers were an all-black infantry unit that was led by this guy, John Jack Black Pershing. He is going to become Pershing's going to become important when we talk about World War I. But right now, he's leading this all-black infantry unit. They also fight, but they're not really credited in this war. There's a song by Bob Marley called "Buffalo Soldier." I linked the song over here in this presentation. You should listen to it if you get a chance. "Buffalo Soldier" by Bob Marley. It's singing. It's a song about the Buffalo Soldiers, these black infantry units experience during the Spanish-American War. So both groups were known for being fierce fighters. And the battle that really made Theodore Roosevelt famous, what made a name for himself, was this Battle of San Juan Hill, right? So in the Spanish-American War, Spain really it was one of these sick men of Europe. Their empire had been falling off. Cuba was one of their last colonial holdings in the New World. So Spain wasn't really putting up a big fight. But this battle in particular, Spain was putting up a big fight against the American forces. And then the story goes that Theodore Roosevelt rallies the Rough Riders up this hill and ends up capturing the Spanish troops and leading to the end of the Spanish-American War. So many American newspapers at this time called this splendid little war. In total, only about 400 Americans died during the Spanish-American War, which 400 people dying is still a lot. But when we talk about wars in that scheme of things, it's really not that many. So it was a quick war, but it had a huge payoff. So there's this Secretary of State at the time, John Hay. He wrote a letter to his friend, Secretary Theodore Roosevelt, saying that this was a splendid little war. So the Spanish-American War ended with the Treaty of Paris. Now, there are multiple treaties of Paris, right, that we'll talk about in our class, right? But this one, the Treaty of Paris of 1898, is very important. Will show up on your test. You need to know it. So the U.S. is going to pay Spain $20 million. And in return, Spain is forced to give up the Philippine Islands, Puerto Rico, Guam, and they said that Cuba is going to be unincorporated, right? The United States isn't going to directly govern Cuba, but we're going to have influence over there. That's this Platt Amendment, right? It was added to the treaty saying that Cuba can't enter in any other treaty with any other country without America's say so. So even though we're not directly controlling Cuba, we still have like a lot of influence over them. So this is a big deal, this Treaty of Paris. All of a sudden, the United States has colonies, empire all over the world, in the Pacific Ocean, in the Caribbean, and this is going to vastly expand America's influence around the world. In Cuba, we're going to actually establish one naval base. It's going to be Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay is, famous because that's a prison where they're going to hold terrorists in our modern times. So it's still owned by America today. This little bit of land out of Cuba. All right. So part of the Treaty of Paris was that the United States got the Philippine Islands. So the Filipinos, they hear about this. They're saying, like, yes, we finally got our independence from Spain. We're no longer part of, Spain's colonial holdings. The Filipinos, they fought a war previously against Spain to get their independence. And they're like, hey, America fought a war against for its own independence. So surely they will give us Filipinos our, independence so we could govern ourselves. Well, President McKinley said that actually the Philippines were unfit for independence, unfit for self-government because they weren't civilized enough. So that's part of that civilization argument that we talked about, the white man's burden. They said that, no, the United States needs to protect the Philippines because they're just not ready to govern themselves. Well, the Filipinos, they did not see it the same way. So in 1899, this Filipino leader, Emilio Aguinaldo, I probably butchered that, sorry, he is going to lead a independence movement in the Philippine Islands. So unlike the Spanish-American War, that was the splendid little war, only 400 people died during the Spanish-American War. This is going to be a huge conflict where Americans are going to attack revolutionary fighters in the Philippine Islands, and also the American military is going to attack straight out civilians at this time too. Both sides employed torture of prisoners. This is going to be a very long, drawn-out, bloody conflict. So in total, about 4,200 Americans were killed during the Filipino-American War, and about 16,000 Filipino rebels were killed, along with 200,000 Filipino citizens killed by the American military. So this is sort of like this hypocrisy of American values, right? The American dream, freedom, democracy. But at the same time, they're murdering about 200,000 Filipinos. So the war ended with the United States taking back control of the Filipino government in 1902, but resistance is going to continue. The Filipinos are going to continue to fight back, fighting a guerrilla war, this hit and run tactics. Eventually, the Philippines are going to gain their independence, but in 1946. During World War II, we'll talk about the Philippines. They're going to be controlled by the Japanese, so the Filipinos are going to rebel against the Japanese, fight another guerrilla war against them, so they're really going to have a hard time. So if you're able to see this one picture in the right, this is American soldiers, and they are waterboarding this Filipino rabble. Right, so pretty crazy, that America, we're calling ourselves the good guys, but at the same time we're doing imperialism and torturing people, colonizing people against their will. So this really it caused a lot of Americans to struggle with this imperialism and stuff. All right, so America by the 1900s has an empire, a full-fledged empire, just like the European countries. From Spain, from that Treaty of Paris out of the Spanish-American War, They're going to get Puerto Rico, Guam. Puerto Rico and Guam are still American territories today. They pay, they have the U.S. dollar. They have limited representation in Congress. The Philippines is going to be American holding until 1946. And then also Guantanamo Bay is going to be a naval base that still exists in Cuba today. And then also America has gained other, territories like Alaska. They purchased it from the Russians. We talked about Hawaii being annexed by the United States, Wake Island, American Samoa. So America is going to have a large presence around the world by 1900. We go from, being this isolationist country to being a full-fledged empire. All right, so this is a map showing America's territorial acquisitions by 1900. So America is going to have a large presence in the Pacific Ocean. This will become very important when we talk about, causes for America to enter World War II, because as soon as Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, it's going to start, America's, involvement in that war. All right, so we talked about how all these people are pro-empire. The yellow journalists are pro-empire. A lot of Americans, like Teddy Roosevelt, is pro-empire. So so there was a large group of people that actually did not support empire at this time. They saw the hypocrisy, especially from the Filipino-American War. Many people, they said that this was opposed to American values. People like Andrew Carnegie, remember he's the steel guy, opposed to empire. Samuel Gompers, we have Jane Addams, the lady who's fighting for women's rights. Mark Twain is also going to be against imperialism as well. So they're going to form this anti-imperialist league in 1899. Remember, 1899 is when this Filipino-American war is happening. So this was, a minority, right? So America was really split on if they're going to support empire or are they not going to support empire. But, there were some, it's good to know that there are some people that fought against it, right? So there's this whole debate going on in America by 1900 for pro-imperialism or anti-imperialism. So if you're pro-imperialism, you want to spread American influence and power, right? How do you show the rest of the European nations that America is powerful too? By having a large empire, right? We need a strong navy. Remember that Great White Fleet? We need many naval bases. We need a strong navy and a strong presence around the world. A lot of people argue that empire will allow the economy of the United States to grow. The funny thing is, not a single country actually benefited economically from empire. It costs more to maintain the empire around the world than the United States or any other European country got resources and money from those colonies. We also have that belief of the white man's burden, that it's the Westerners, primarily European and Americans' duty to civilize the non-white foreign races around the world. Also, there's this belief of the Monroe Doctrine. We haven't really talked about this Monroe Doctrine much, but it's going to become important later on. So the Monroe Doctrine goes back to President James Monroe back in the 1800s during the War of 1812. The Monroe Doctrine says that the North and South America, the Western Hemisphere, is America's territory, that Europeans need to keep their business out of North and South America. Otherwise, America will declare war on them. So North and South America, the Western Hemisphere, that's America's territory. Other countries can't mess with it. And then also, President at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, huge proponent of imperialism. So the group that was against imperialism, they had other issues with it, right? So one of them said that imperialism did not fit American ideals of freedom. How can we say that we stand up for freedom and democracy if we're colonizing other people against their will? On the other side of this anti-imperialism argument, they said that you need to focus on America's issues first. There's this American First policy where let's deal with the issues that's taking place in America first before we start worrying about other people. Also, many people argued truly that empires were expensive to maintain. Again, it was not profitable to have an empire, even though a lot of people said it was. Many people didn't want to take on the white man's burden, for better or for worse. Some people saw flaws with this white man's burden, saying like, hey, that's racist to say that other people aren't civilized. But on the other side of this, they said like, oh no, why should we care about other races? Because they were racist. They didn't care about the other people around the world, so that's why they didn't want empires. And then also a lot of people said that by claiming other territories outside of the Western Hemisphere, like in the Pacific Ocean, America had effectively canceled the Monroe Doctrine, which said that the Western Hemisphere was our territory. So what are we doing in other people's territory? And then also we had those, famous people like Andrew Carnegie, Mark Twain, Jane Addams, who are, writing about how empire is bad. All right, so when President Roosevelt takes over, right, he becomes, president. We'll talk about him later on, but we'll talk about Roosevelt right now just in the case of imperialism. So 1904, Roosevelt is going to add an amendment to the Monroe Doctrine. So this is going to be called the Roosevelt Corollary. He said that the United States has the right to intervene or stabilize the economic affairs of smaller states that were unable to pay their international debts. So what America would do is they would establish these things called banana republics, right? So the banana republics, these are places in Latin America where American businessmen would be like, hey, I'm going to loan you some money to create these, these fruit companies and stuff, and you're just going to pay me back once you make a profit. But the thing is, they would charge huge interest on these loans, knowing that the people that they're giving these loans to would never pay it back. So this is going to be America's justification for toppling different governments around Latin America. If you didn't pay back your debt, America is going to come in and effectively take over your government. So also, President Roosevelt is going to have a motto: speak softly and carry a big stick. So America is going to do what it's going to do, but they are also the police force of the world. So if they see something that they don't like, if they see a leader of a country that does not support America, America has the right to overthrow that country. So America has the right to use military force in order to keep order in the Western Hemisphere. So this is a very famous political cartoon of Theodore Roosevelt. He's marching into the Caribbean Sea with his fleet of warships that say like debt collection and stuff, and he's carrying a big stick. So if you mess with Theodore Roosevelt, if you mess with America, that gives America the right to whack people with the big stick, take over different governments. So this is the case with the Panama Canal. Okay, so in 1880, the French are going to begin plans on building the Panama Canal. So this is a canal, a waterway that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Typically, if you wanted to sail from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, you had to pass all the way down through the Strait of Magellan, through South America. But this would add like a couple extra weeks to your journey. So they got the idea like, hey, why don't we just make a shortcut through the middle, build the Panama Canal? The problem is Panama didn't exist as a country yet. It was actually owned by Colombia. Colombia owned this land that we know now as the country of Panama. But Colombia didn't want to give the land over to France or America to build this canal. They wanted the rights to the land themselves. So America is going to support a Panamanian revolution against the Colombian. So America is going to send weapons and supplies to help the Panamanians overthrow the Colombians in Panama. So now, yay, Panama gets its independence. But as soon as Panama gets its independence, the United States is going to take over the Panama Canal. And the Panamanians, they weren't part of this deal. So they're going to rise up against America saying like, hey, that wasn't part of the deal. You can't just take a bunch of our land once we just got this country for ourselves. America's response to this is they're going to send a fleet of warships over to Panama in order to, enforce the Panamanians to sign a treaty giving the Panama Canals to the United States. So construction for this canal begins in 1904, and it's going to get completed in 1914. This is probably one of the largest man-made projects, land construction projects in world history. So they're going to finish this 2 years ahead of schedule, but many of the workers are going to die due to yellow fever while constructing the canal. So thousands of people are going to end up dying during the construction of the canal. So the crazy thing is the United States is going to maintain control over the Panama Canal until December 31st, 1999, until eventually it was handed back over to the Panamanians. So this is a couple of pictures of the construction of the Panama Canal. In the picture on the right, that is Theodore Roosevelt working one of these crane machines to dig the Panama Canal. And the left is a political cartoon depicting Theodore Roosevelt again as a giant single-handedly digging the Panama Canal. This is another picture of the canal, right, just to see the massive scale of it. Today, it's still one of the main, economic waterways in the world, right? One of the, most. So if the Panama Canal shuts down, it causes millions of dollars, billions of dollars of issues. So this project, really big deal, is going to cut this travel time from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean in half. Eventually, there's going to be, other parts of imperialism, right? So for example, after Theodore Roosevelt, gives up his presidency in his second term, he's going to sort of recommend this guy, William Howard Taft, to become the next president. Taft is going to come up with this thing called the dollar diplomacy. So this is the practice of giving smaller loans to smaller, weaker countries, so they would be dependent on the United States. So this is an example of like economic diplomacy. So instead of using the military to take over these countries, they're going to use the United States economy to have economic influence over other sovereign countries in Latin America. Also, President Wilson is going to come up with this thing called the moral diplomacy, which is saying that the United States would only offer financial or military aid to countries that agree politically with the United States. So this is also incentives for these Latin American countries to be on the U.S.'s good side, because if they're on their bad side, then the U.S. will overthrow their government, not give them military support. So America is really going to expand its influence in Latin America during the 1900s. And really, up until the present, too. America still has a lot of sway over Latin America, especially in recent news and stuff. But that is pretty much it for American imperialisms. So we talked about a lot of stuff. Please review these slides, and thank you for tuning in. I will see you on the next video.